Before you die, you see... Probably the most famous intersex character is Sadako, the ghost girl from The Ring. A character you probably didn't know was intersex because it's only made explicit in the book series, 2 of the film adaptations that didn't make it to the United States, and a video game. It's not a particularly good representation as a somewhat fetishized creepy monster, but it's still a fun character, and it's the most mainstream representation we have. She's also really popular in Japan, where the franchise is sprawling and comparable to Nightmare on Elm Street as a horror phenomenon, with Sadako as a horror icon equivalent to Freddy Krueger. To properly talk about her as an intersex figure, I have to talk about everything that keeps her canonically intersex, and at least a cursory look at the other media. Don't worry, I'll break it up into several videos. The franchise began with Ring, or Ringu, a 1991 book by Japanese author Koji Suzuki, a man who up until that point had been known for writing parenting books to get men excited about being fathers. In subversion of traditional gender roles, he argued that men should take an active role in child-rearing, alongside their wives. He claimed to write all of Ring while resting his child on his knee. It's appropriate because Ring's dominant themes are about sex, procreation, and androgyny. Though by all appearances, Suzuki is a cisgender, heterosexual, and dyadic man, this is one of those cases where if he were to come out as queer and or intersex, I would not be surprised at all. And I don't think the book should be framed as specifically written through the gaze of the other. I'll mostly illustrate it with clips from the 1995 TV movie adaptation, the most book-accurate adaptation. While the later books in the series take the plot on a specific route of cosmic and medical horror, this is a later development retconning established plot to some extent. Ring itself should be taken in its own context, and not necessarily informed by its later entries. According to an interview, when I'm working on my novels, I'm not really conscious of what I'm doing. The plot isn't decided at the onset. Something in the air just sets me off and I start writing. No one knows what will happen. In modern writing terms, he's a pantser, writing from the seat of his pants, instead of a plotter, which is the same writing technique used by J.R.R. Tolkien. Suzuki compares it to Mozart's ability to compose music on the fly. Ring is about an intrepid reporter, Asakawa, who investigates a series of mysterious deaths of local teenagers that appear to have acquired a virus-like supernatural disease, capable of spreading and killing its victims simultaneously, regardless of their location. Asakawa is initially presented as traditionally masculine and a bit of a misogynist, wanting his wife to be quiet, and getting a thrill over helping his ironically charismatic friend Ryuji cover up a rape. It's later indicated that Ryuji completely made this up, but as far as Asakawa knows, he helped his friend get away with raping a woman. Asakawa's wife gets a weird vibe from Ryuji and doesn't like him, and Asakawa can't blame her, but also can't help but be drawn to Ryuji. Their relationship generally resembles the one between Lord Byron and John Polidori, as was fictionalized in the latter's The Vampire, and often interpreted as homoerotic. I likewise read the relationship between Ryuji and Asakawa as full of gay subtext. Notably, Asakawa first interprets the virus as a Japanese form of HIV, and then he and Ryuji get infected with it.
いや、何か新種の薬かもしれない。いいですか？エイズだって、初めはほんの小さな出来事だったんでしょ?
Despite Asakawa's apparent traditional masculinity, he is rendered androgynous next to Ryuji, who presents himself as uber macho, and is physically stockier than Asakawa. Mad, bad, and dangerous to know. While generally entertaining Asakawa with his animated narcissistic nihilism, Ryuji also effectively dominates Asakawa by characterizing him as the more feminine party, prone to hysterics, doting like a housewife. and there for Ryuji's amusement, so he might as well sing like a female celebrity. Now kiss! Filmmakers definitely picked up on how feminine Asakawa is, because in every adaptation but the first one, he's translated into a female character. This woman is then explicitly paired with the Ryuji character in a heterosexual romance, which underlines how gay the original book is.
悪いけど今日帰れそうもないや。急な仕事入っちゃってさ。
なんだ、せっかくビーフシチュー作っといたのに。
うわ、ごめん。
本当に仕事？
え？何疑ってんだよ。
Asakawa uses his skills to track down the origin of the deaths to a resort, where a young boy tried to record a favorite show, and instead picked up a mysterious broadcast, hijacking the signal to that specific TV set. His family went home before he had the chance to watch the tape. Later on, the teens who would end up dying watched that same tape. Asakawa finds the tape and turns it on. He sees what appears to be a chain letter kind of gimmick, with a creepy series of clips, including a mysterious ring image, and the announcement that he's been cursed and will die in 7 days, unless he takes a specific action. But the teens played a prank and recorded over that part of the tape. Suddenly the tape just cuts to normal Japanese commercials on a normal broadcast. The curse was recorded with psychic projection, known in Japanese as nensha, and Asakawa feels what the viewer felt, both physically and emotionally, so he knows intuitively that it's real. As confirmation, the phone rings, get it? And he knows it's from the ghost despite her not saying anything. Unlike in the American movie, where she iconically says,
7 days.
Suzuki named the book the same time he wrote this scene, happening across ring in a Japanese to English dictionary, and deciding that he liked its various meanings. There is a physical ring image, a phone ring, and the idiomatic meaning of a shot rings out, people becoming alert when an important event happens. This is interesting because probably no native speaker would make these connections, and it just goes to show that English speakers taking random Japanese words and using them in weird ways just because they like the sound of foreign words are not unique. Japanese people can do the same with English. There's nothing inherently bad about it. It's not disrespectful, just a little distorted. Knowing that Ryuji is both a genius and into the paranormal, Asakawa brings him onto the case. Ryuji insists on seeing the tape to examine it, so Asakawa takes Ryuji back to his place to make him a copy. This is in violation of the rule that Asakawa's wife made him abide by that says he can't bring Ryuji into their home. But it's the middle of the night, so he assumes that she'll be fast asleep. No such luck. She walks in on them watching a video, late at night, in secret, and assumes they're watching porn. She gives him a look that he knows is about anger at men, and he feels guilty. Gender politics theme? But he snaps at her to go to bed, and she does so. Ryuji takes his copy and goes home. Later on, Asakawa learns to his horror that his wife investigated the tape and watched it with her infant daughter in her arms. This makes the threat deeply personal and makes Asakawa's own motivation tied into rescuing his family. Not just his wife, but his kid. This codes him as feminine. Japanese men don't typically care about their children in this way. American men don't typically do either, but the gender role disparity is more apparent in Japanese culture, which has led the book to be characterized as feminist. It is in kind with Suzuki's own ideology about men needing to care about child rearing. It also makes Asakawa and Ryuji seem more gay. Most film adaptations make him into a mother caring about her son, because that makes more intuitive sense to people than a father caring about his daughter. It is blatant sexism, as is tied into heteronormativity, and the intersex erasure. The next couple of days, Asakawa does some investigation, and he and Ryuji analyze the video. Despite Ryuji coming off as the worst boyfriend ever, Asakawa learns that he apparently has a steady girlfriend, Mai Takano, a super hot young student of his. Ryuji indicates that he is that guy who sleeps with the students. Asakawa is turned off by the situation, but Ryuji reveals a more sensitive side in his interaction with her. The reader might deduce that Ryuji's obnoxious macho attitude is more performative. With Ryuji on the case, the two of them trace the video's origins to a psychic named Sadako Yamamura, daughter of Shizuko Yamamura, a famous psychic woman who lived through World War II. As it turns out, Shizuko got her powers as a blessing from a mystic after rescuing a statue from some American soldiers trying to defile it. So this whole thing can be interpreted as a metaphor for wartime generational trauma. Shizuko was tested by some skeptics, and despite genuinely having powers, was interpreted as a fraud and lost her status, the events of which are featured in the cursed imagery. She later committed suicide by volcano, and that's super metal. These characters are based on the real-world Chizuko Mifune and Sadako Takahashi, young women who claim to be clairvoyant. Mifune was accused of being a fraud and committed suicide by ingesting poison. As far as we know, Takahashi didn't become a murderous ghost. Our Sadako, whose name means chastity, with the same connotations as the American name, a proper conservative girl, became an actress and joined an acting troupe. This time in her life would be elaborated upon in the book Birthday. Sadako, chastity, true to her name, did not have sex, but she was also horny as hell. She was born with androgen insensitivity syndrome, which is a person with XY chromosomes who nevertheless develops apparently as a girl, but with testes instead of a uterus. And the character of Sadako apparently got an elevated sex drive because of this. Owing to her propriety and embarrassing intersex condition, she didn't sleep with anyone, but she was horny, and her sexual desires manifested in her psychic powers. Though androgynous and objectively rather plain, she psychically projected sexual desire and made everyone around her view her as a feminine beauty. Unfortunately, that led to men sexually harassing her, and her acting career took a nosedive. She ended up at a clinic where doctors were working to eradicate smallpox. One of the last people to be infected with smallpox was a doctor who went for a walk with her to a local well. Overwhelmed by her projected sexual desire, he then raped her, which is simultaneously a standard patriarchal form of rape, where a man assaulted a woman, and a twist where she effectively raped him by reflexively hitting him with magic lust, such that he lost all control. It's sexually violent, but a feminist theme. In the struggle, he threw her into the well to die. One of the meanings of the title is the view up through the ring-shaped well as was projected onto the video. The well is also a yonic symbol, vaginal. She entered the symbolic vagina to die, in a twist on how one usually exits a vagina into life. And she was ultimately reborn as a vengeful spirit. She was also infected with smallpox, and when she became the spirit, she had a link to the essence of smallpox. Basically, it's kami. And she effectively had sex with it to give birth to the curse, referred to as her child. She can never have a child in life, but can have one in death. The ghost version of Sadako is a perversion of who she was in life. Cruel instead of kind, and promiscuous instead of chaste. The resort was built on top of the well, and Sadako unleashed her curse into a television broadcast when it was being recorded. This recording is, effectively, asexual reproduction, similar to that of a virus. Ryuji compares people being intersex to being like a virus, in the sense of being beyond normal human sexual limitations. Upon learning that Sadako is intersex and has testes, Ryuji gets excited, while Asakawa gets weirded out. Ryuji thinks that intersex people are really cool, and describes it as like a next stage of evolution, while Asakawa just gets confused about gender and whether or not to consider Sadako a man. Neither of their reactions are particularly respectful. The next stage of evolution thing is something that neurodivergent people get a fair amount of time, and while it's supposedly aggrandizing, it's also kind of dehumanizing. It doesn't treat you as like a real person, you're just the next stage of evolution. See also that god-awful Predator sequel. While Asakawa demonstrates some very basic transphobia. Both of these negative responses are somewhat mitigated. Ryuji is ultimately framed as androgynous in a similar way as Sadako, and could be said to be relating to the idea himself, while Asakawa gets over his gender confusion fairly quickly and determines Sadako is feminine enough to continue viewing her as female. In context, it's generally progressive. Asakawa and Ryuji find the well and dig up Sadako's corpse so that she can be properly laid to rest. Sadako's ghost appears to thank Asakawa, so they think that's it. However, the curse was actually more like a virus after all, and a victim can only be saved by aiding its asexual reproduction. Asakawa is spared because he made a copy for Ryuji, but the curse kills Ryuji just as he figures out what the answer is. Ryuji's desire to tell Asakawa makes him come back as a ghost, just long enough to pass the message along, which is how Japanese ghosts typically work, only they're just long enough to fulfill one last desire. This will be retconned in the second and third book. Ryuji is more persistent than Sadako. In the wrap-up, Mai reveals that their relationship was entirely platonic, that Ryuji was just as chaste as Sadako, and that he was actually extremely feminine, and only played butch with Asakawa. He got something out of that relationship, but was mostly extremely timid, and not at all the Byronic persona he pretended. In this context, Ryuji's glorification of intersex people is reflective of his own androgyny. I'll have more to say about this in my review of Spiral, which elaborates on Ryuji's physical androgyny. Once Ryuji passes on the message and ostensibly passes on, Asakawa decides to have his wife and daughter make copies of the tape and show them to his parents-in-law, in a dark ending. As the book comes to a close, he muses that this could be the start of a deadly pandemic, referring to the circle of people affected by the curse as a ring. This is another meaning of the title, and it won't be the last. I think Spiral adds 3 more. Based on how Ring ends, I don't think that Suzuki originally intended there to be a sequel. Later entries in the series take the plot in different directions. The original book is a lot more character-focused and concerned about the implications of Sadako trying to infect the entire planet and what it means to be human. But we can see the seeds of these ideas here, as well as the film's more grounded conflicts with Sadako in the cursed videotapes. One of the book's main themes concerns androgyny, and in a way that reflects the author. Asakawa embodies Suzuki's principle of the devoted father, in contrast to traditional gender roles, and according to him, 50% of Ryuji is based on Suzuki, while the other half is made up. Both Asakawa and Ryuji are androgynous and super gay, and Sadako as an intersex character is their androgynous foil. It seems to me that Suzuki has a personal androgyny expressed through these characters, and because of this, it's unwise to frame the book as through an othering gaze, and the depiction of an intersex character shouldn't be assumed to be from the perspective of a cisgender, dyadic, heterosexual man. It's not about is it own voices versus someone else. It's more about, is it superficial and does it resonate with intersex people? A lot of intersex people don't like that the scary ghost was made intersex, seeing it as a demonization. It does bear some similarity to Sleepaway Camp's reveal of Angela as a force-femmed boy, using gender bending to add to the horror of Angela murdering people. And I personally suspect that Suzuki was inspired by the film, which premiered in Japan a year before he started writing the book. He lists various American horror movies in the book, indicating he's a fan of the genre, and describes the Ring series as more like American horror than traditional Japanese horror. However, I think the execution of Sadako as an intersex character makes it fundamentally respectful, with human Sadako as a pitiable victim of her circumstances, and ghost Sadako as specifically horrific for being a cruel murderer, not for being intersex. Her being intersex just leads to some gender confusion, not repulsion, and Ryuji's excitement is framed as a legitimate reaction. Honestly, I think it's kind of cool that this horror icon, the Japanese equivalent to Freddy Krueger, can be an intersex character. It's regrettable that she's only explicitly intersex in a few adaptations, but it plays a big part in the book series. Ring is far from perfect, but it is compelling and decent overall in its intersex representation. The book is easy to find, and I'll include a link of where to get it in the description. Remember to hit like, subscribe if you haven't already, support me on Patreon if you can spare $2, and absolutely share this video, or in 7 days.
Long, long,危ないね、あの人。避ける組対長い避ける組。